Hello, everyone. I'm here to tell you a story today. It was the Ramadan of 2017 in Johannesburg, a few months after I started working as a photographer. And I pitched a story to an editor saying, I would like to photograph the Tarawih as a contemporary look at Islam in South Africa. And he replied, nobody cares about Muslims in South Africa. If we want something, we'll take it from Saudi or Turkey. I am South African. I am Muslim. I am also a woman of color who grew up in a little town called Ladysmith Mnambithi in KwaZulu-Natal during the dying years of apartheid. So I knew very well what it was like to live under tyranny, to be treated as less than human or worse, or to be invisible. And I was not going to act like we did not exist or matter anymore. How many of you here know that the first Muslims in Southern Africa, some of my ancestors, were taken as slaves and political prisoners from Indonesia by the Dutch in the 1600s? And that because of this history, and in later years, the forced and voluntary migration, that South Africa has one of the most diverse Muslim populations in the world. Or that in the slave communities, it was Islam that became a rallying point to build unity around, and that Muslims were prominent in the anti-apartheid struggle. So I photographed the Tarawih anyway, and put up a picture that night on Instagram. Another editor saw it and called me and asked if I would photograph for the entire month, and we would do a double-page spread on the day of the Eid celebration. It was also around this time when a Dutch ambassador saw my work and said, oh, I didn't know there were Muslims in South Africa. How did they get there? There were shocked faces in his delegation which mirrored my own, but still not my hurt, when he remarked about the white domination and said, oh yes, we did a lot of mischief back there then. Mischief, he called it. It is not just ignorance, it is erasure. So we never truly saw ourselves in our own history books. And this is why the work we do now is so important. With this project, I hope to create something that generations to come can look upon as a source of history and memory. And I've barely even scratched the surface. So far, mostly exploring spaces of worship, of prayer and observance, together and in solitude, where the embodiment of connectedness, of rootedness, and reminiscence is visible. Even so, and already I am so grateful and so proud to say that in 2019, this work was acquired by the South African Iziko National Museum and Gallery to be part of the archive and permanent collection, and will now form part of our country's historical visual memory. Thank you. For me, this is a testament to how hungry we are to see ourselves dignified in these public and institutional spaces. Everything that I do with my work and the people who I photograph for stories on themes of social justice, be it access to water and sanitation, or safe housing, or food safety and gender-based violence, even equal education, plastic pollution, climate change, everything is inevitably and inextricably linked to the structural and systemic legacies of our colonial and apartheid past. And still, every single day, I see resilience, I see strength, I see dignity and pride. The industry of photography is not separate to the industry, to the world which we photograph. Not only are so many of us here from these very disadvantaged communities, but the question of what stories get told, who gets to tell them, and how, still remains linked to a legacy of access, of privilege, and of power. And still, be it in the field or in this room of narrators, I see stories of triumph and people who are here and achieving things despite our odds. And this is the story of the majority world. A favorite verse of mine from Quran can be translated with the meaning, O humankind, we have created you from male and female into nations and tribes so that you may know one another, so that we may know one another. To truly know one another, we first have to see each other as equals, even if just in our own humanity. And to see each other, well, we first have to care enough to want to do so. Since that Ramadan in 2017, one of the things that gives me purpose in my work is to never again be faced with the statement that nobody cares about a people. Because to care, well, that is the least, the very least that we can do. Thank you very much.
And now, please welcome to the stage journalist, author, and 2019 National Geographic Eliza Sidmore awardee David Quammen in conversation with visual storyteller and National Geographic fellow Erika Larsen.
Thanks. She's the bull rider for this segment, and I am the rodeo clown. But I'm really glad to be here because I love her work and she's a friend of mine. For 10 years, more than 10 years, Erika has been going to some of the most remote places on the planet, cold places and hot places, and paying careful attention to some of the most remote people in the world and the cultures that they live in. And you're going to be seeing it. We're going to start with a little bit of the mundane and personal, and then we're going to move toward the magical and universal. Do you remember the first photo you ever sold?
No. I don't remember, but I remember the first photo I ever saw, or that meant something to me.
Which was what?
So it was a picture from the Hubble of Saturn, and I remember holding it in my hands. And in that moment, you realize that everything that's so far away is so close to you, and you are of it, and it is of you, and it existed in a photo. And then I thought, that photo, that photography is magic, and magic can remind you of who you are and then who we're going to be.
How old were you?
That I don't remember, but maybe I was 11, something like that. I don't remember.
So when you, remind me where you grew up.
I was born here, just right here on the stage. No, I was India. No, I was born in DC, but I grew up on the eastern shore of Maryland.
And when you were in high school and finishing high school and going to college, what were the expectations of your family and your friends about what you were going to be, what you were going to do? What did people think Erika was going to become? What was the pressure or the expectation?
Oh, what? I know that my mom said to me that she said I could be, my mother was a cook in the home and I could be a teacher. And you can, she said, you can do whatever you feel in your heart and I will support it with everything. And I said, I want to be a part of this photography magic. And my father went and got some kind of camera, some DSLR, whatever it is, SLR camera, and put it around his neck, and that was that.
Again, how old, roughly?
Maybe 17.
Okay. And you went to college and majored in photography, right?
I did, yep.
Finishing that, when did you reach the point where you could say, now I am going to be a photographer and only a photographer? I can give my life to photography. I can afford it. The world is letting me do it.
Well, I never looked at it that way, ever. I think there's something about, when you realize that it does exist and that you're part of this collective idea of how we can translate the world. It's not about, that's it, then you just are. I think it's like, right, once you know something, you can't unknow it. And so that was it. So I'm not even sure it was about photography or not in that regard, whether, it's something that I can continue to do or not do. It's just that now it is and you'll have to do it. So it's, it just is.
You weren't always a photographer of remote places and remote people. You won a World Press Photo Award for sports photography. Mm-hmm. What was that about?
So, well, you saw some of it. It was actually that young girl standing there. I don't know, the little girl there she had the camo on in the woods. So it was about children and hunting. And the idea was to understand why children that didn't live a subsistence lifestyle wanted to be engaged in hunting. And so I think I didn't enter it in the sports category. I think somebody put it in the sports category. I'm not kidding. I think at the time World Press I might have entered it in portrait, and I think they put it in the sports category. But the idea, so I didn't really think of it. It wasn't about sport, but it was about why we wanted to connect with nature when maybe, and all the reasons you think you don't need to. So that was the exploration, and then somebody else related it to sport. But
okay, yeah. Even then, that theme was there. Mm-hmm. The Sami people. 4 years you lived with the Sami people as a Viga, is that right?
As a Biga.
Biga. Mm-hmm. Tell us what that was.
So a Biga is, traditionally it was a woman that would come in from maybe a family that wouldn't have had as many resources, meaning at that point reindeer. And so it would go to another family and help and do things. And so that could be from cooking to cleaning to helping with the children. But ultimately, one of the most important things is that you would, travel with the families on tundra, and then also you would slaughter the animals. And so when you think about that, if the Biga gets to slaughter the animals, the most important part of that connection to these cycles of life and death. And they celebrated that, so that's what I got to do.
It occurs to me we should add, in case anybody doesn't know, the Sami are the reindeer herding people of northern Scandinavia. So the animals that you're slaughtering, the animals that they're taking care of, are reindeer. You've said on tape about that 4-year project. You learned the language, you lived with them, you stayed. And you said, I came here in search of silence so that I could begin to hear again. This is a journal entry that you've read on tape, a journal entry while you were there. I came here in search of silence so that I could begin to hear again. I am now more a stranger in my own home than I am here. Help us understand what led you to do that. I'm going to go spend 4 years with the Sami in northern Norway. You were in your early 30s about that point, right? You had been a photographer, been a professional photographer. Did you come to some sort of a crisis point or a point of discomfort with your own life in the South?
Well, I was in New York City at the time, so I think there came a point I had been working a lot, doing a lot of editorial work, but really amazing work, but kind of going in and out of families, and it sort of existed on 2 levels. I was working with a lot of, maybe in our demographic of like 60 and over, and a lot about how we in that age group deal with what it is to get older, our relationship to family, our relationship to landscape, our relationship to death, but also how we perceive the world, so dementia, Alzheimer's, and these. So I was doing a lot of stories on that, and then I was also working a lot with adolescents, and so things around what it is to be a teenager, mostly in society in the United States, the whole range of it. And I said, and it was amazing, but I realized that for my own, I think I was constantly dealing with themes of life and death, but in these situations, and I had begun my personal work exploring hunting to take a different look at life and death that was removed from the human, or what I perceived as the human, because it actually isn't, but what I perceived as the human emotion around it. And then from that, I was getting these glimpses of seeing. When I would go on these hunts, I would realize spending time, kind of deeper time in nature, away from a place like New York City, and even away from these sort of familial situations that I was like living in these homes, I could feel like this kind of beginning of like a fine-tuned instrument starting to happen. And as I would see animals, I could begin to see these ancestral stories. And then I realized it's our story, like our human story. And you could see that through, and I thought, my goodness, it's not that you're telling stories, you're remembering them. And it was really strong, and I said, I have to learn to hear again, because I have a glimpse of it, but I need to. So I needed to break all the parts and begin to hear again. And then I thought, okay, so where can I do that? And so I first went to the Amazon. I don't know why, but that's where I went. And I realized in that time, it wasn't where I was meant to be. It was like going into this dark, dark, dark ground underneath. But that's where I found my son, and I found my husband. But that wasn't time yet. And then I said, what's the opposite of the Amazon? And I'm sure scientifically it's not this. But I thought, what is it? And I said, that's the Arctic. And I went to the Arctic, and everyone just got to see Jenya. So maybe from what which she just translated of the Arctic, there's something, right? It's something that this land holds. And so that's why I went.
4 years. You had found your husband. You had your son.
Not yet. I had found them both, but had not had either of them.
Okay. We started this afternoon with oceans, and you have to understand that this woman is as deep as an ocean. Let's talk a little bit about ritual. You've said that ritual, and you've put it on the slides, an exploration of ritual. It's sort of the overriding theme of your collected body of work and the grant work recently. Ritual, especially in the lives of remote peoples. What do you mean when you say, as you've said to me, and I think you've said in other places, ritual allows us to explore time?
So, well, I'm still learning what that means, and perhaps I always will be, but I have a belief in, so for my life that, as we're trying to understand, so I believe we're remembering who we are to be humans, right? I think for me, that's what this journey is about. It's this process of remembering who we are. And so in that, we have to, we get confronted with our perceptions of time. And, on the most basic level, right, every culture holds a different understanding of what time is and how to express it and how to teach us about that. And so I've gone through different phases of watching time be one thing and then become another. And then I realized that in order to understand the next sort of level of how I'm experiencing time, I need a place of liminal space. And liminal space is this moment when, everything is, but isn't. It's the time of before, but after. And I think it's also a really difficult time. But within that, that's when you can sort of like break the concept of what you had perceived the moment before. And then I realized that, when I'm watching ritual, and whatever ritual is, whether it's washing dishes, whether it's a prescribed ritual that's been going on for 10,000 years, but when you're watching ritual, it is a time for this liminal space to exist. And within liminal space, we can all begin to have that moment to connect to what it means to be human. So that's...
Liminal space, transitional space.
Yeah, I think it's transitional space. I think it's a time of...
The green room. Is that liminal space?
That's a type of liminal space.
Okay. There's a line from William Faulkner that you just put me in mind of from his book, Light in August. I think it starts the 5th chapter. He's telling these deep stories about some really troubled, fraught people. And the chapter begins, memory believes before knowing remembers. Does that make any sense to you in terms of what you're thinking?
Absolutely. And I've heard it different ways, that the future is the past, but yet the past is the future. I think I was talking to someone last night, and my brain's going to block it out, but they said we're always in contradiction. We're in contradictions to what we think. So the minute you have this, then it's it's contradictory over here. So yes, I think it makes a bit of sense. But I think the fact that it doesn't make sense is what keeps us on the exploration.
Yeah. Let's look at and talk about some of these particular images, okay?
Yes.
If I can find the ones that I want to ask you about. Excuse me if we just, okay, so this is probably the end of that loop, and now we're starting. Okay. Let me just ask you about that. Why does a hunter collect bare feet?
I don't know why we collect anything, but I think collection is, I believe in that the things that we experience, there's many levels of it, and the one level is our physical manifestation of, and the Earth's physical manifestation of all of these things, so therefore it becomes our collection. I don't think all hunters collect. I think many do and all don't. What I think is that hunters guide us, and many guide us to look at the one thing that's difficult, right? We're looking at our death, and we're looking at what it means to bring death. And because there's a part of it also that we feel there's the idea of sustenance, and so how we live and how we take as part of this sort of larger ecosystem of life and death and what we need to live and survive. And so there's many things that we're questioning. So I see hunters less as collectors, but guides into that. But I think many collect.
This photo is also part of your hunting group.
This is the one that won the sports thing.
I'm not surprised. Okay. So this is a North American girl?
Yes.
Who's part of a hunting family?
Her name's Mary, and she's from Georgia, and she's probably in her 20s now.
Okay, well, the thing that I want to ask you about is what might connect this photo with some of the later photos, and I'm going to jump ahead to them, but freeze this photo in your mind, this photo of Mary in her camo, Mary in full camo. And why does a person wear camo? Because it's a pattern that connects you with nature, right? Is that fair?
I think that's very fair.
Okay.
Oh, there's a video.
There we go.
There.
Okay. The lady on the right. And that pattern.
So this is stuff that I don't know, but this is what my exploration is trying to understand. So I think that we are interpreting the world around us, right? I believe, or for me, the journey is that nature, because by remembering, we're all remembering that we are nature. I believe so. We are all of nature. It's exactly what you're doing in your books, in the way that you do it. We're remembering this. And as we remember it, we need to put it out there. We need to physically manifest it in these different ways. So, Real Tree did it for Mary. And this woman here, she's wearing her icaros, or her songs of her interpretation of her landscape in the rainforest of Peru. But what's interesting, and again, this is my interpretation of the understanding of it. This is not her words or who she is, but right. So it's the patterns of the physical nature we see, the patterns we see on the animals, on the snakes. It's the patterns that she's able to verbalize through her voice, and then it becomes a physical pattern, but then at the same time, it's actually the internal pattern of our DNA makeup as well. So it's all of these things put together, and it's just one translation, and we all have our translation of that. We're all translating this.
This is the people who have that idea of kene, which is the pattern, and they, you call them people of Ronan, the Great Serpent. It's an important animal for them, the anaconda.
Yes, yeah. Yes, because the anaconda has all of the patterns of the world, of their translation of the world, of our world, of the collective world. And so the snake has it, there's ever-changing patterns, and there's that never ends, and it never doesn't end. And here you can hear her singing the pattern.
Do I need to click
One
again?
more time.
Okay. The woman on the left.
That's Emma Full Moon.
What is she thinking?
I don't know what Emma's thinking.
These are the people who live with and from salmon.
Yes. Yeah, so this is, here we're in Alaska with a community of Yupik. I don't know what Emma thinks, but I will tell you about the first time I met Emma. So you walk into a place, I walked into Quinnahook. It's like a village of 600 people, and obviously everyone's gonna know that you're not from Quinnahook. So you're walking down the street, and I thought, it's a horrible, horrible feeling. I mean, I feel like it's a horrible feeling to walk in and just, bah. So I found a walrus hanging on a door, and I thought, well, I want to go where that walrus, it was the walrus skull, the full walrus wasn't there, just the skull. And I knocked on the door, and Emma answered the door. And I just introduced myself, and she said, okay, come in, and I sat down on the floor, and she was just cleaning berries. So I don't know what's in Emma's thoughts, but what I can say is that she expresses herself by the things that she does, by opening the door and just cleaning the berries, by letting me see this moment, by a gesture that she'll do. So that's...
Okay. This is a seal that she's setting up.
This is a seal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to bounce. Oh, well, let's listen to this.
Okay, so I can, yeah.
What was that?
So in this village, so the story goes about, let's say they're Yupik in over the past 80 years. Because of the Christian missionaries that went in, they stopped dancing, and they stopped relating to their natural world in the way that they always had, in the way that they would translate it. And one of the big things was dance. They didn't stop hunting, but they stopped describing the hunt in the same way. And so we're in the southwestern Alaska, and we're also right on the Bering Sea. And so as we're seeing this permafrost melt happening, you are watching you're watching sort of the land come up, things melt, and you're watching these rising sea levels, and so this go down. And so in this huge transition that you're seeing go on, you're also seeing these huge cultural transitions. And who are the people explaining the cultural transitions, the ones that are there. And one thing that happened, so there's this old village that's literally coming out of the ground that maybe we can say for sure 600 years. I'll let the village and the archaeologists say maybe it's even more than that, maybe closer to 1,000 years old. But this old Yupik village is coming out of the ground called Nunalak, or the old village. And as the old village is coming out, you're literally and this has been going on for over 20 years, year after year, the history and the stories, all the oral stories are physically manifesting itself again. So it's the past, and the future that is the past, or the past that is the future. But it's all coming back. And so something that happened is some of the youth there, I think, go through transitions of how they identify with their landscape and who they are. And one boy, Michael, walked out to the Nunalak, the old village, and he sort of, maybe, if my words, tripped over an artifact, but I think that's my words. I think in his words, he found his ancestor. And he went back to the village that had really been in debate about whether they would actually archaeologically dig this site and preserve it. He went back and he said, it's time to do this. And then other children said, we can hear the voices and we're going to dance again. We haven't danced in 80 years. And the elders said yes. They began to work with other people to what do you want to say, sort of birth the village again, this old village. And now I went to Mike, that's the boy you saw, and I went over there and he said, do you want me to show you the seal hunting dance? And it was right after, it actually was probably the same day, I think it was the same day that Sarah, who I stay with when I'm there, her son Jared brought home the seal. And she opened the seal like this, and I'm looking at her, and there's so much. You can see, for me, you see the transitional time of relating to the seal. And later on that day, we went over, and Mike said, let me show you the seal hunting dance. And so that's what that was. Maybe click one more time, maybe pass through.
I want to see it again. So, ritual, you've seen ritual change over time. Oops. And maybe, is it fair to say that ritual helps a culture deal with change? We tend to think of ritual as frozen, as this frozen culture, but ritual, is it a tool that helps people endure change that comes to their landscape and their culture?
I think we are change. So therefore, it's a way to express who we are.
Who is this?
Who do you think it is?
I think it's, well, I've got a sad answer and a happy answer to that. I think it's a dying culture looking to the gods for help. But I don't know, maybe it's also Erika. Who do you think it is? Tell us what it is. And is there a ritual use of it?
So, okay, on this, so in this journey, this is Western.
And bear in mind that it has to happen
in 25 seconds. Well, maybe I'll just leave. You guys can maybe figure out who it is. I don't know if I can do that in 20 seconds. Really, I can't. I can't.
That's a good place to stop. It's inexplicable. Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Please welcome photographer and National Geographic explorer Anush Babajanyan.
On October 23rd last year, I was standing in the middle of a cotton field near the town of Margilan in Uzbekistan, photographing the people around me, myself having picked about 1 kilogram of cotton by then. And I was thinking to myself, yes, this is how I'm going to photograph the story of water in Central Asia. This is going to be part of a chain of visuals that will bring my story to a conclusion. On another day, I was standing in front of the Tuyuksu Glacier, a few kilometers away from Almaty in Kazakhstan, and that's me. I was thinking to myself again, and even pronouncing, no, I don't know what I'm doing. Why again am I photographing this glacier? I was lost. Not only was I lost, my drone was also lost. But in fact, I was happy about this feeling, about this state of mind, because I had that feeling that very soon I was going to find myself. And the first lucky sign of that was that I found my drone. Now, the question I kept asking myself was, how do I choose to tell a complex story? One that includes layers of history, human interests, the environment and the changing climate, culture and beliefs, and enveloping the all-important resource of water. Years ago, when the countries of Central Asia were part of the Soviet Union, a system was implemented to share water. After the system collapsed, after the union collapsed, the system also collapsed. And now there are more issues than solutions to water management in these countries. The population of Central Asia is increasing. It will grow by 20 million in the next 20 years. With the rise of population, there is more demand for water. Global warming is causing longer irrigation periods and the retreat of glaciers on the Tian Shan and Bamiyan mountains. It is estimated that there will be 30% more need for water, and at the same time, 30% less water by 2030 in Central Asia. Now, visualizing this was and remains a continuous process of searching and making connections for me. In Kazakhstan, I photographed at the Kyakti railway station where villagers took water from a wagon cistern that arrived to the village every day. And that was the only source of water for this village, both drinkable and irrigation. By the Aral Sea, I met women washing in warm spring water fountains that appeared as the sea began to retreat. I photographed along the river Amudarya in Uzbekistan. It is one of the two main sources of water in Central Asia, along with Sirdarya. The more I photographed, the more I studied and realized for myself how this story was not only about water at all, but also about people, culture, survival itself in this region. These are women returning home after a day on the rice field, very close to where Amudarya begins. 18-year-old Dinara on her wedding day in Muinak, a former seaport in Uzbekistan. During the days of roaming around the deserts of the Aral Sea, I got to know Artemia salina shrimp farmers. This brine shrimp is so tiny, it is like sand. It appeared here only recently as the sea retreated and salinity increased. On our second day by the sea, a sheep was sacrificed in hope for the population of Artemia salina to rise. I took a number of photos, and then I saw this scene. The brown liquid-like Artemia, the blood of this sheep, and all around the receding water of the Aral. The human interests, spirituality, and our environment were all in this image. This photograph was nothing I had imagined would happen. It did not even include people, and I think of myself as a people photographer. But I leaned into this image, into this visual, feeling that it mattered as much and that it was as alive. And for that moment, I felt I had one little answer for myself. I believe each story needs an individual approach, but also a photographer's own search through layers and complexities. And as true authors of our work, we need to allow ourselves to give justice to our findings, which are the realities and the revelations of our stories. And this I say mostly to myself, of course, because both mentally and spiritually, and in fact also physically, having 2 more countries yet to visit for this project, and many more stories hopefully to tell, I'm only just beginning this journey. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there will now be a 20-minute break.
I've done 2 hours on a snowmobile and I've been wanting to go again.
Yeah, this one. How do you make that?
Have you worked it out? You should try to get like rolls with like
Stephanie's doing it. I'm miking people.
Ready, microphone 12.
I'm going to drop this down. Grab it from the bottom.
No.
Okay.
We're back on.
Pull, keep pulling, keep pulling.
But now we're in a break, you know that. So, yeah.
Testing mic 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, testing 2. Microphone 12. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, because you had your necklace on, so I don't.
I can take it off.
You can't see it, so you might as well take it off. That'll make it easier for us.
And now, please enjoy this short film by National Geographic explorer Ismael Vásquez.
San Pedro, apóstol, Humpback, Long, Jehovah, Bên quê chẳng mà hỏi mà khá sẽ toàn người mà thế đó là biển là hồ rêu biển địa họ trồng thế để còn thế thì chẳng có gì sẽ phải chịu mà ban họ nói để tổ chức đối với người ta tại nó sang hạt thôi anh hồi sao rồi khoảng
Quá trình là an đời văn thể nhã nọ quá trình năng hủ về tinh tín hồn non khổ đã những ngày ăn khỏe mà hè à tại vì không cái dạy là cái chồng nô chính mình quan trị rằng đi yêu rằng mà sẽ đã đi quan hệ mà chúng ta mình quy hoạch tận năng tin năng ngon đó nồng đấy những cái nhung chỉ là tại bên mà tận năng mà chúng tôi hàng là ảnh thủ mà không chịu ăn lại về là thì
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the National Geographic Society Senior Director for Latin America, Gael Almeida.
Ismael was born and raised in a small indigenous community in the southern part of Mexico that is called San Pedro Amusgos. The video that we just saw is in his native language, Amuzgo, and one of the main characters is his mother. Ismael's goals as a storyteller is to really portray a new image of indigenous communities that can help them overcome stereotypes and be more truthful to what they are and how they live. Ismael got, in December, the Sundance Institute grant to finish the production of this short film, and he's here with us, so I want to ask him to stand up so that we can give him a round of applause. Ismael, ¿te puedes levantar, por favor? Gracias, Ismael, por tu trabajo. And now, to continue with our program, please welcome conservation photographer and explorer Ronan Donovan.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to start with a quote. This is a quote by the late
John Berger. He was an English novelist and art critic. John said, "With their parallel lives, animals offer man a companionship which is different from any offered by human exchange. Different because it is a companionship offered to the loneliness as man as a species." So to help illustrate John's point, show of hands, how many people have ever lived with an animal in the same house? Fish, dog, cat? Yeah? It's most of us, right? There are scenes like this that is familiar to us. A large animal in a vehicle. This is actually my brother Eamon with his dog Willem. And Willem was a very clever dog. He figured out really quickly that he could get out of the vehicle. He could just open the doors. You get in my brother's truck and he would jam screwdrivers and different tools, blocks of wood, in the door frame so that Willem couldn't open it up. And so we domesticated this animal, the wolf. This is an image by Robert Clark, a story about the domestication of wolves. I think the agent for this Maltese is going to get some feedback here. The Maltese doesn't look too excited to be standing under that big animal. But there's an archaeological dig site there in the corner that shows a skeleton of a 12,000-year-old man clutching a puppy. So it's this idea that we have this connection to this wild animal, different than any other. It's the first animal we domesticated some 30, 40,000 years ago in Eurasia. And so just a quick overview of the gray wolf in North America. This is a map of their current and historic range. Historic range is the light orange and the darker is their current range. So where I live in Montana, we have about 800 gray wolves, which is considered a success. Just last week was the 25-year anniversary of the wolves being brought back into Yellowstone National Park. There's, as I said, 800, but in the late 1800s, from 1888 onwards, every year on average there were about 5,000 wolf pelts submitted for bounty claims in Montana alone. There are 5,000 wolves total in the lower 48 now. And why is that? Why was this eradication of this animal so prevalent, whereas now we love it? We got rid of the wolf and we replaced it with the Maltese and various other things. It's because they eat the same things we do, and we fear them. And this is an image I made in Yellowstone, my first project for National Geographic in 2015. And this image is of wolves that are scared of people, right? It's forward-facing, they're kind of fearful of us, and we feel that. So they were absent from the landscape before they were brought back into Yellowstone. As I said, 25-year anniversary bringing wolves back to Yellowstone was last week. And so the issues around Yellowstone are with the lifestyle that Westerners brought to and imposed on the landscape of the West, ranching, raising very dumb animals, really. We dumbed down the wild counterparts in Eurasia, and we brought them to Europe. And so they make for easy prey now and then for wolves. On average in Montana, they lose about 50 cows a year to wolves. Last winter, they lost 30,000 cows to weather. It's important to realize that Yellowstone was created for the geothermal features like this, the Canary Springs and Mammoth Hot Springs. So the borders were drawn not for what the wildlife needed or what the ecosystem needed, but for what was convenient to preserve those geothermal features. Yellowstone is a massive supervolcano. Average elevation of Yellowstone is above 8,000 feet. So it means it's a very harsh place to be in winter. And so the idea of Yellowstone as a blueprint of habitat for the rest of the West isn't necessarily accurate because it's this unique place, this volcano. But Yellowstone and the wolf relationship there is about research and about tourism. And so this is a research helicopter that is being flown over a pack of wolves to put a collar on it, a tracking device on the animal. This is Doug Smith hanging out of the helicopter on a harness, trying to put a dart in the rump of that wolf. Once they get him down, they go through a protocol of general health checks, DNA samples, and they put those collars on. These are newer GPS tracking collars so they can figure out their movements. Are they leaving the park very often? How big are their home ranges? How are the packs interacting? And what are they mainly feeding on? And so this is a diorama or a piece of art from a National Geographic magazine article in early 2000, showing the difference in habitat from the wolves being brought back into the landscape, showing that they have a huge impact on the success and the health of the landscape. One, you have too many elk, and the other, you have a more balanced ecosystem when you replace just a single animal known as a keystone species. And so in Yellowstone, I spent much of my time failing, as is the case with things that are scared of you. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to try to chase people down that were scared of you and try to take their picture. It would be a challenge, and your images would reflect that. This is a remote camera. This is a motion-triggered camera. So the animal is aware of the camera, they're scared of it, they're seeing and hearing the noise, click, click, click of this tool. And so after this project ended, I really felt a need to understand more about the real wolf, the wolf that is not afraid of you, and try to tell a better story about them. I never saw wolf pups, I never saw much socialization going on in Yellowstone. They just weren't relaxed whenever I was within a couple hundred feet or even a quarter mile. Once they would smell me, it was game over. And so I knew, as many of us did, of this place. This is a cover by Jim Brandenburg, the photo. And National Geographic sent Jim Brandenburg and a biologist named David Meach up to Ellesmere Island. It's the furthest northern landmass in Canada. It's about 700 miles from the North Pole. And this was a place where the wolves there had never had a negative encounter with humans. There were no humans living there permanently. There was no livestock, no competition with humans. And so I pitched the project, it was approved, went up to this very barren, seemingly landscape that is treeless. It's kind of rolling, badlands, prairie-esque feel. But it's a place that has a lot of life, obviously. The wolves are there and other species. And so just quick overview where we're at. This is 80 degrees north. It's right next to Greenland. And the wolves there, as I said, they don't have any fear of humans. And so instead of using camera traps, you can get in front of them while they're traveling, lie down with a 24mm lens, and they walk past you. This was after spending about 3 weeks with this pack of wolves. And you could also use camera traps, but you could use them in more intimate settings at the den, and they ignore it, they urinate on it, becomes part of the landscape. You clean the lens, and then you're good to go. And so the pack that I spent the most time with was this pack. This is 10 wolves total. There are 6 adults and 4 pups. A couple down here, these are the shaggy yearlings. These 2 are the females. They were 2-year-olds, incredibly skilled huntresses. This one eye. She had 1 eye and half a tail. She was quite a wolf. And the 2 adults, the breeders on the top there. And I'll let them introduce themselves. I named them the Polygon Pack because these polygon tundra ponds are something unique to the high Arctic that formed over thousands of years, and this was very close to their den site. And so I thought today, in an effort to kind of better introduce us all to the life of a wolf, from here on out, I'm going to show you images that were created over the course of 2 days. This was about 35 to 40 hours that I was spent with them, following them while they were hunting and pushing on. They were very hungry. And I thought that this would just be a way for us to just dive into a day in the life of a wild wolf. And so the day started. I took about 12 hours to find them. And then once I engaged them, they were in the midst of a hunt. And they hunt musk oxen, which is a large relative of the goat. Males weigh about 800 pounds. And it is this like long dance that goes on, this process. It's not what we think of as like they run in and they quickly, successfully take down an animal. It's a dance that this one lasted for over 6 hours, where they would push the herd, but the herd also works together to defend themselves. And this is obviously a formidable line for the wolves to try and penetrate. There was a large male that was associated with this pack. And so most of the time, the wolves are unsuccessful here. They're sent packing. And it's an opportunity for the wolves also to learn and to figure out how to hunt these animals. One of the yearling males, he was the largest wolf by body size, but he was not the best hunter. He was awkward. He would get in the way of the other adults. He would kind of stumble around. He would come in at the end when all the work had been done. And so it's a testament to just how much they have to learn. You know, like human hunters, we are born with physical and mental attributes as humans, but we can hunt many different things, but we have to be taught how. And wolves are the same. And so during these hunts, the pups are nearby. At this time, they were about 8 weeks old, and so they're kind of still long-legged, gangly-looking things, but they're able to keep up, and it's an important learning phase for them to watch how the adults move and learn to hunt these animals. So this went on for a while, and then they took a nap. They slept for about 7 hours on and off. I did my best to get some rest as well, and then they're on again. And what they are coursing predators is what wolves are. So meaning they travel the landscape long distances, hoping to bump into some prey. They found these muskoxen again, different herd, long ways away, but the muskoxen here kind of had this nice little fortified wall behind them, and it didn't last long. The wolves just tested them for about 20 minutes. They went down along sea level here. This is along one of the fjords along Ellesmere. And they eventually went up to over 2,500 feet, so the lowest point in their home range up to the highest. They bumped into another herd. This one also had a very strong male muskoxen. You'll see down at the bottom. And in this next clip, the challenge can be that you really have to respect these guys. They're big, they're quick, and it's impressive to see how much the wolves obviously respected that. This next clip's going to play. All the audio, I should mention, is by Inuk throat singer. Her name's Tanya Tagak. And this next clip will just be her voice and music over the action. So that was one of the 2-year-old females. She ended up being fine. They carried on. That was just a normal day for her in her pursuit to try to get food. You know, wolves exist in this strange realm as an animal where they literally have to put their life at risk just to eat, which there's other predators that hunt smaller game than they do, or smaller game than they weigh, so it's not as much of a challenge. But here we are carrying on our way here. They have these kind of bulletin board sites, I kind of called them, where it's an old carcass site that they would routinely visit, mark it, smell other wolves that had maybe come through the area, and it was a chance for the young to be able to figure out the pups. If they get lost, go to the bulletin board and figure out what's going on. Bumped into a lone male. They thought maybe this would be a nice opportunity, but again, these are relatives of goats, the muskoxen, and so they take cover down anything they can get their back end up against, and it was a quick little dash, again, a couple minutes just to test to see if he had a limp or if there was some weakness they could exploit. They carried on, checked the nearby bulletin board. And then they went for a different prey that's located on the island, a smaller prey. This is an Arctic hare. And it looks like a lot of effort for potentially just a 10-pound reward. 10 pounds is a large hare, mind you. But as you can see, they're much more nimble. They're quicker than the wolves are. They did get one, but they were all very hungry. And this is the pups trying to beg to one of the yearlings who doesn't want to share. They go to the old male, try to get him to regurgitate some pre-chewed meal. They broke it up with some play after they had at least a couple bites of food in their belly. We were at this point at about, I think, 40 miles of distance traveled over the course of the 2 days. But yeah, relieve some stress, play a little bit, and then they were pushing higher in elevation in their home range, and they were going, again, for more of these Arctic hares, going higher and higher up along this plateau, got into some snowy areas, and I'll let this clip play on its own as well. Looks like a lot of energy for no reward. They seemed hopeful in that chase, but it didn't work out. As soon as the hares go up to higher ground, the wolves just can't keep up. They can't chase them. So I followed them up. They crossed over this pass, and they dropped down this narrow, basically, avalanche chute. And they all go over, and they pile over, and I'm photographing, and the pups go over. And I go to follow them. A machine that I was using is an ATV four-wheeler. It's just like an off-road motorcycle with 4 wheels. Get off that, walk over this area, and it's sheer ice. It just drops off, and I see these slide marks of all the wolves. And it's too steep. It's probably a 65, 70-degree pitch. And I think that they are gone, that they must have just poofed off into a bunch of rocks. This was what I thought maybe was the last photo that I was going to take in relation to these animals. It took me a couple hours to figure out a way to get down this steep plateau, get to a point where I can see their tracks traversing down that drainage. And I think, I don't see anything. I don't see any bodies piled up or anything. And I eventually, an hour later, find them. And they're just curled up. This is just a normal day for them in the life of these wild wolves. For me, it was an incredibly challenging experience, all the technology in the world, trying to keep up with them. I was wrecked, destroyed, exhausted, been up for 40 hours, photographed and filmed all of this over the course of that time, and realizing that these wolves are kind of living these present daily lives in the moment, cooperatively working together to achieve things that they can't on their own. And in many ways, that's the human happy place as well. And in closing, I'm going to read another quote. This one is by the late Fred Woodruff. Mr. Woodruff was an elder with the Quileute tribe of northwest Washington, the Olympic Peninsula. And Mr. Woodruff said, "We learned from the wolf how to survive and how to be more human, how to honor our elders, to protect and provide for our families, and we learn from wolves the loyalty you need to really belong to a tribe. Thank you.
Please welcome wildlife filmmakers and National Geographic explorers Malaika Vaz and Jahawi Bertolli.
Good afternoon. We're so excited to be here today. My name is Malaika, and I'm a wildlife presenter and filmmaker. And in the last few years, my work has focused on lesser-known critters for television, big cats as part of my Nat Geo Early Career Grant. But today, I am so excited to be talking about our shared passion for the oceans.
Yeah. My name is Jahawi Bertolli. I'm an underwater filmmaker, but also wildlife photographer. Grew up in Kenya, spent a lot of time out in the Mara with big cats, but my real passion is the ocean, and that's what I've been focusing my time on. Now, Malaika, when it comes to marine stories, what is your focus and why?
I've always chosen to focus on marine trafficking in the last few years. And it's because when I was spending time out at sea on these fishing vessels looking for marine megafauna, I realized that we were treating the oceans as though they were inexhaustible. And when you think of the word wildlife trafficking, you associate it with ivory and with elephants and tigers. But people don't often think about the marine stuff that gets out of our oceans. So for the last few years, I've been making stories that are focused on marine trafficking in India's oceans. But coming back to you, Jahawi, I'd love to understand more about why you do what you do and how it all started.
Well, I was blessed to sort of grow up in such a diverse and beautiful country as Kenya. And we spent time on this little wild bit of the coast. And, you know, as a child, it was the funnest thing. Get up early in the morning, run to the beach, and go snorkeling and see what was going on. Or at low tide, check out all the little rock pools. And it was an idyllic kind of upbringing, but as I grew older, I realized it was changing. Mm-hmm. When I went out, all the little things I used to go out and see were disappearing. And to the point now, it was almost like a barren wasteland. And I was like, there is so much emphasis on the terrestrial wildlife in Kenya, but no one is really looking at the oceans. And huge changes are happening in our oceans, but there's also huge amounts of stories to be found. Yeah. So I started looking into ocean stories and came across this incredible story about a humpback whale migration that comes through the Kenyan coast. And I was like, I have to make a film about this. Mm-hmm. So with the support of National Geographic, we went outside to try and film the first sequences of humpback whales in Kenya. And as all good wildlife does, they didn't show up this year. But in this process, it's been very exciting because we were working with communities, because wildlife is one side, but there are people who have been living with these animals. And if you really want to find the stories, you need to work with these communities. Mm-hmm. So we went into these villages, especially in the Laminal Archipelago, and we were interviewing old fishermen. And we were trying to find out old stories of humpback whales. And we did find some incredible stories, but actually what we found was a much bigger project. Mm-hmm. Because we found that we could actually tell the story of the changes in the Indian Ocean from the stories of these old fishermen. Mm-hmm. And through their eyes. And it's so important when you go into a community and you want to create educational material, you have to understand this is their story. Yeah. And they're the best people to tell it. Mm-hmm. So we've been now working on this film, we've been interviewing fishermen, and we're now trying to tell the story of the change through the eyes of this really old, incredible fisherman. And we have a little
We have a
trailer.
sneak peek?
Yes, we have a sneak peek.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Bahari yetu. Kuna wengi hawajui bahari ni nini. Najiona niko nyumbani nikiwa baharini. Nilikuwa nikiona watu wangu Waswahili wamesafiri kwa karne nyingi kupitia bahari. Sisi ni watu wa bahari. Kwa muda mrefu kadiri ninavyoweza kukumbuka, nimejua bahari yetu ni kubwa na inaonekana haina mwisho. Ilikuwa imejaa maisha, sote tulikuwa tukijionea. Ilionekana bahari ilikuwa imejaa samaki. Uvuvi ulikuwa rahisi sana. Ulikuwa na uwezo wa kuvua kadiri ya kile unachotaka kuuza. Lakini katika maisha yangu nimeona bahari yetu inazorota na kufa kabisa. Na sisi ndio tunaua bahari. Lakini tunaweza kuwa suluhisho. Bado tuko na muda wa kuokoa bahari yetu ikiwa tunashikana mikono pamoja. Mimi ni mvuvi. Hakuna kitu kingine ninachoweza kufanya. Nitakuwa mvuvi hadi nitakapokufa. Kwa hivyo, nifanye nini? Kizazi kijacho kitafanya nini? Kuokoa bahari yetu ni kushikana pamoja.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm so excited to see the final documentary once it's done.
Yes, coming soon. Now, tell me, Malaika, was there a moment that inspired you to tell ocean stories?
So I grew up in a small coastal village in a place in India called Goa. And when I was younger, I used to compete in windsurfing professionally. So I would spend huge amounts of time training in the ocean. And this one time, I was all alone. It was probably 5 p.m. And I saw this enormous ripple in the distance. And it didn't really look like a turtle or a dolphin. So I had to go closer. And when I went closer, I saw this humpback whale just spy hopping out of the ocean and looking me straight in the eye. And in that moment, I was blown away because I didn't even know that we had humpback whales in our waters. And in that moment, I also realized that I wanted to tell stories about the oceans as a way to understand them better, not just in my backyard, but across the world.
Amazing. You had better luck than I did with humpbacks. Now, I'm sure everyone here would really like to know, what are you working on at the moment?
So for the last 3.5 years, along with my best friend and teammate, I've been working on a film on marine trafficking with manta rays. So we've been following the trade pipeline from India's brown, murky waters where people don't even know we have mantas, to the Indo-Myanmar border where I've found through my investigation that there are links between wildlife trafficking and insurgency in the region. And then finally going undercover in the wildlife markets of Guangzhou and Hong Kong in China, pretending to be a seafood trader to understand how much of this contraband is being sourced from India's waters. The film is in its post-production stage right now, but we have a little sneak peek as well.
My generation was born at the peak of the world's 6th mass extinction.
Look at that!
But for me, extinction is something that's happening in my own backyard. The very first time I saw a manta ray, I was diving off a coral reef in the Maldives. I hadn't seen anything like it before. And ever since then, mantas have captivated me like no other species.
I'm heading to this port where I've heard that there are large landings of rays, so let's see what we find there.
And for the past few years, I've been seeing too many manta rays where they shouldn't be.
Look, they have gill plates here. This is what they're after.
Predominantly, one of the biggest threats to mantas has been these fisheries for them, where people are actually targeting animals to be able to extract certain body parts, like their gill plates out.
No, students.
I've been tracking the strait down, living with fishermen and witnessing the hunt out at sea. My investigation has taken me to places that I could have never imagined.
We got our information through a source that there are some contraband items which are being transported in a vehicle.
I am thousands of kilometers away from the east coast of India, where these gill plates were sourced from, at the Indo-Myanmar border. And looking at these bags that represent over 40 to 50 animals, I'm only beginning to understand the numbers and the transnational scale of this trade. I've been to customs warehouses in remote border towns and tracked down middlemen.
5-star hotel mein khate hain. China mein koi sambandh nahi hai.
And I've gone undercover in the biggest market for wildlife products in the world, China.
Leo, can you inside?
There's no need for surgery.
No, there's no need for surgery, just need for
6歲咧就由於商家炒咗啦，先至肉啲人買排魚腮嚟食，即係好似我哋自己懂行嘅，我都唔會走埋嚟食。橫魚腮咧就係喺藥店裏邊唔入藥嘅，即係搜索唔到嘅。
Once you've reduced that population down to 50, 20, 10% of its natural levels, you're looking at decades and decades for it to recover, if ever.
The deeper you dig, the bigger it gets. This is the heart of the illegal wildlife trade, and the supply chain points straight back home.
I mean, that's some pretty incredible stuff, and I mean, it's hard to watch. But I have a question: is being a woman in situations like that, how's your experience been?
To be honest, initially, Jahawi, I received a lot of opposition for being a woman. I remember being told multiple times by seafood traders that I needed to get out of there or I would be hurt badly. But over time, I've realized that when you spend enough time at these fishing ports and going undercover in these different wildlife markets, you become part of the furniture. And I've also realized that being a woman is such an asset when you're doing undercover investigative work, because people see you as less threatening. So they kind of invite you into their spaces. They take you into places that some of my male colleagues wouldn't be taken into. But more importantly, they trust you with their stories. They will tell you that you can come into their house and hear about how they connect with the ocean. And for me, that's the most important part of being a woman in the field.
Yeah, I can tell you my wife gets a much better reaction than I do.
Coming to you, Jahawi, what are the challenges of filming in the Lamu Archipelago and across Kenya?
Well, the Lamu Archipelago is an incredibly unique place. Firstly, because its proximity to Somalia. And so that makes working in the northern bit of the archipelago quite challenging at times. So you do have security concerns, which you have to think about. We generally go up in traditional dhows and tend to spend one night and head out and not spend much time there because you never know what's going to happen. But the archipelago is where two big currents come through and you've got two big rivers also coming up. So we only have such a small window of time when we can get in and film in clear water. So on one side, it's very special because it's like a window into an otherwise unknown environment. But you really have to make sure you're planned out and ready to go when things happen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty incredible. So I know your work also focuses on policy change. Now, do you think that you can actually have tangible change through film?
I do. And I think that to have tangible change, you kind of have to be really, really intentional about the process of creating impact. You can't just create a provocative film and put it out into the universe and hope that, magical unicorns will help deliver impact. You have to be conscious of it from the get-go. And when I was making my documentary, I realized that a film alone wasn't a strong enough medium to push for policy change. So along with a teammate of mine, we made a rough cut of some of the footage, and we took that to the Wildlife Trust of India, which is one of India's best research and advocacy organizations, and to WildAid, which is an anti-trafficking organization based in the US. And last year, we actually got India's first baseline data survey on mantas across the Indian coast. So that was really exciting. And when I was filming in the field in China and in India, we actually had a team of researchers collecting data every single day. And 2020 is the year where we're going to use both the data and the documentary to push for policy change.
That is fantastic. Amazing.
And Jahawi, you know, we've been friends for a while, and whenever we've had this conversation about the films that you make, what I'm always struck by is the fact that the films that you make are with the people and also for the people. So why do you think this process of making films accessible is important?
Well, it really comes down to the audience you want to engage. So we're trying to get people to connect with their ocean.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's one thing to parachute in and film and go and then come back with a polished film, but really it's their story. Mm-hmm. We're there to listen, to understand how they view their environment. And whether it's working on educational films, it's about including the communities you're working in to be part of the process. And what that does is it creates a feeling of ownership of this film.
Yeah.
And people get truly excited about it. I mean, we've been working with fishermen who've never seen underwater. And all of a sudden, they see these clips that we show them. They are so excited. And we've had now that they'll come back and they've filmed something on their phone and they send us these little clips and they're like, what's this? You know?
What have you seen?
And through this, we got the first ever footage of Risso dolphins confirmed in Kenya's waters from a fisherman off Lamu.
That's amazing.
So we're making incredible discoveries. And on top of that, now when we're going into community engagement and through some of the films I've done before, the actual community in the Lamu Archipelago has come together because they want to set up a community marine protected area off Lamu. Because they see the benefit of the ocean now and they've fallen in love with it. So we're actually seeing communities really taking the step. And that is, I mean, that creates such hope within me. I mean, I think it's fantastic.
That's incredible, and I'm so proud of you.
Now, do you have hope?
Yes, I do. So I've been around for 22 years, and I feel like in the last 22 years alone, so much has changed with our oceans, and not for the better, to be honest. But at the same time, we've seen so much amazing stuff happening with researchers and scientists and students. There's been a groundswell of support for marine protection in the last 2 decades. So I am hopeful, but the one thing that I would say is that hope on its own is cute, but hope when married with impact is the dream team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage photojournalist and National Geographic